I took good, go back where we started. I know you're still waiting, wondering where my heart is. Praying things won't change, but the part started. You realizing maybe I, there no more, there no more, there no more, there no more, there no more. You realizing maybe I, I'm waiting for them. You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of you. You'd be like heaven to touch. I wanna hold you so much. At long last, love has arrived, and I thank God I'm alive. You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off. Pardon the way that I speak. There's nothing else to confuse. The sight of you leaves me. There's left to see. But if you feel like I, please let me know that it's real. You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of you. You'd be like heaven to touch. I wanna hold you so much. At long last, love has arrived, and I thank God I'm alive. You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off you. Pardon the way that I stare. There's nothing else to compare. The sight of you leaves me weak. There are no words left to speak. But if you feel like I feel, please let me know that it's real. You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off you. Hurry up and wait. If you wanna dance, take my hand, take my hand. Cancel all your plans, take a chance, take a chance. Ain't got forever, we only got today. If you got a night to feel alive, then baby stay. If you wanna dance, take my hand, take my hand. Cancel all your plans, take a chance, take a chance. Ain't got forever, we only got today. If you got a night to feel alive, then baby stay.
Nobody can tell you there's only one song worth singing. They may try and sell you, 'cause it hangs them up to see someone like you. But you gotta make your own kind of music, sing your own special song, make your own kind of music, even if nobody else sings along. You're gonna be nowhere, the loneliest kind of lonely. It may be rough going just to do your thing, the hardest thing to do. But you gotta make your own kind of music, sing your own special song, make your own kind of music, even if nobody else sings along. So if you cannot take my hand, and if you must be going, I will understand. You gotta make your own kind of music, sing your own special song, make your own kind of music, even if nobody else sings along. You gotta make your own kind of music.
So just putting out there our 2-minute warning. We'll endeavor to get started again in about 2 minutes. Thank you.
You stepped inside with a vibe I ain't never seen. Yes, you did. Ooh, so girl, if you talk like you walk, come and talk to me. But look here, it would break my heart, break my heart, break my heart if I find out you can't move. You better show me now, show me now, show me now. 'Cause when I take it to the floor, ooh, you gotta get down. You know what to do. Hey, Mr. DJ, play a song of this pretty little lady. 'Cause if she dances, get as she look right now. I just might make her my baby. I just might make her my baby. I just might. Oh, I just might. But first, may I just say that your face got me so intrigued. I'm so intrigued. But what good is beauty if your booty can't find a beat? I don't wanna know, girl. So please don't do that to me. 'Cause it would break my heart, break my heart, break my heart if I find out you can't move. You better show me now, show me now, show me now. 'Cause when I take it to the floor, ooh, you gotta get down. You know what to do. Hey, Mr. DJ.
All right, everyone. So I'm going to have us regroup. If you're grabbing your last cup of coffee and can make your way in, that's great. And so for our next presentation, I'd like to call upon Mr. Jonathan Allen from ISK. We're fortunate to have him here today to go over post-secondary information. And I think we're also, we're fortunate, from my understanding, Jonathan was in the Ontario region for a long time before he went to headquarters, and he brought some of amazing people from the region with him, so it's kind of good, kind of bad, but we know that we have someone who's speaking us today and knows the Ontario context. So without further ado, I'd like to call upon Jonathan.
All right, hi everybody. And thank you for that introduction, Mick. Somebody just said to me, I saw your name, and I'm like, it can't be the same guy that's been around forever. So I joked with Angel, they can't get rid of me, even though they may try. So I'm Jonathan Allen. I'm the Senior Director of Education Programs at ISK nationally. But like Mick said, I spent over 2 years in the Ontario region, about 5-6 years ago, and I'm in my 14th year in education. So I've been through a lot of the changes, a lot of the good, a lot of the new investments, and a lot of the frustration. And I want to acknowledge that right off the top. We absolutely know that more money is needed in PSE. We absolutely hear all of your frustrations. We've made recommendations for investments in PSE virtually every year I've worked in education, starting with the investments that led to budget 17 and 19 and 24, even though those were only the resulting partial investments. We do and will and continue to make recommendations for all of the things that you're talking about here and that are frustrating. So that's sort of the backdrop of what I wanted to say. We know that students are getting squeezed out. We know that staff are stretched. We know that costs are rising and things are hard to navigate and there's more and more on your plate. Those are the exact stories you've told us and that we want to carry forward. So I just wanted to acknowledge that off the top. And what I want to leave you with is some data about what do we see now in the data that you and your communities and your education authorities and institutes report to us as that kind of baseline for the next time we go and push those requests up and out in the current format. So I just want to do a few hot pursuits from some of the previous presentations before I get into the PSE stuff. So there is a real connection between the ISK reporting, the data collection instruments, and the MNP project. Mick and I were just talking, there may be a way to technically make those link to save work and acknowledge what Garden River was saying about, there's only so much time and so many people that work with these units of data. How do we put them together? That's something that I'll discuss a bit with Koo and with Mick and Angel. Again, to try to save administrators time to touch things less often and feed as many different things as possible. That would be the ideal. But also just want to talk a bit about that those are different facets. So the MNP project, which is really, really fascinating, and I haven't seen all of the details on it, but just today, that's the forward-looking projection. That's a really important, this is what we are saying that our student body needs for costs. The DCI in the reporting is some of that, but it's reporting the actual costs. And once we get into my deck, you'll see some of those. But those are two parts of the same ultimate story. There are, certain fixed costs that are growing, that are changing, and if there's a certain budget and costs are going up and eligible students are going up, something's got to give in that. That's really the story we tell at headquarters. We've told it to our new minister. She knows it from her own experience, but we are able to bring that story, and that's really been the message that we've put forward in these recommendations. Those recommendations haven't generated decisions. One partner from another region said you need to advocate harder, and we laughed, and then they said, no, you need to advocate better. So I do take that message too. It is a push. There are a lot of competing pressures, but post-secondary, ultimately, at the end of the day, is relatively a simple story, or we try to make it simple, to ministers, to the Minister of Finance, to the Prime Minister, because it has benefits no matter how you slice it. And with all of the focus on the need for skilled labor, the need for higher education, the need for economic development and construction, all of that comes together. So we think the next push on this, we change the angle to repeat whatever is being said in the budget of the year. So that's going on in the background. So I'll zoom back into why that tool is helpful. Looking at those together with your other work is really interesting, and we'll follow up a bit on that. I heard the comments from Daniel, I believe it was, about some of the limitations in the rules and tools on the program, including the maximum amount payable for the students. We've made a lot of changes over the last 10 years to eliminate things that were barriers that even we didn't understand the intention of, things that had been there for decades, like the one kick at the can of one type of degree at a certain level. Those kinds of things got eliminated over 10 years ago, but there's still stuff in there that we can tinker with. And the maximum amount payable has become a blockage that we don't really see the original intention for. So that's something that's next up for change in the next rounds of authorities. That will relieve the frustration that was expressed here a bit earlier for those very high cost but higher education type of programming. So that's an important thing. That also leads to something that Angel said. It's fine to change all the paper and change all and broaden all these eligibilities, but without the money, they become empty policies, empty guidelines. And it just puts some of those even harder decisions on practitioners. We know that, but practically, that is a tool that we can change now. We can work on the sort of rules and tools, the eligibility, the guideline, to make the changes that's frustrating to partners, frustrating to students, while we wait for the investment. Again, not a perfect answer, but we know just broadening the eligibility when all of the list of potential activities can never be activated because the money is going to the most important thing, students. We know that, but hearing those stories just reinforce why we are pushing and putting the resources on changing things now. And then that gets into the kind of stories I want to make sure that I'm able to take away with your permission and with your voice too, and talk about where you can help make those advocacy and those lobbying pushes, because you have access to folks we don't in the department. That's another important thing to remember. So those are just some of the connections to the comments earlier, and I'll get into my stuff. So first of all, I want to thank the Chiefs of Ontario for all of their work on this. Thank all of the communities and the partners. You've educated me and my team over the years on what it really means in the field. The institutions, the IIC, you educate us. And so that is something I'm very grateful for. And also, you're the frontline workers in education, and that's something we talk about in the department a lot, and it really snaps people to attention. So I just really want to acknowledge how important it is and how much work we know is out there after hours with students who are having trouble navigating a system, or families and all of that. So we know that, we see that, and that is part of what we want to turn into something as we drive forward. So my presentation, and I will try to move it. Oh, there we go. Oh, good. I'm not a really technical person. So this presentation is there's a number that we put out on the tables, and it'll be available digitally. It's a lot of data, but it's your data, printed back out, assembled based on what we see from what the reporting that comes into the department is. And the big questions I want to guide us with this is, do you see your experience and your students' experience and your institute's experience in here? And we'll get into some of the reporting levels and the rates, and some things are averaged, but we know with an average, some things will be obscured, really extreme success stories, but some extreme struggles. So those are the kinds of things. What does this data mean back to you now that you're seeing it aggregated and put back? Is your experience there? If not, can you share that with us and with the region so that we can have that real quantitative and qualitative story? Ontario does a great job at this. Some other regions don't have this kind of reach that your organizations, your tribal councils, your PTOs and COO has. So we're really appreciative, because Ontario is a microcosm of the entire country. You have every situation that exists in other regions and more here. And so that's why I really also value Ontario, because every scenario out there nationally exists in Ontario, when other regions may not have the same diversity. So that's another really powerful thing of your work on the sort of national stage, if that makes sense. So again, like I said, we're going to talk about the data, the qualitative, the quantitative, and how we use the data. And this is just a start that we put together based on the kind of reporting. We can customize this. We can work with OBELT. We can work with individual communities to keep this kind of data up to date, to produce cyclical reports, to do deep dives on your own community or grouping of communities with chief and council approval. So this is sort of just a start. We can keep talking about data, and there's a lot in here, and I won't go through it all in detail, but just know that this is the kind of thing that we can offer as a service out as well. Okay, so this is just a bit of and I'll go through it fairly quickly. There's a few things I want to zoom in on, but this gives some scale and scope. The national program is worth 450 million, and Ontario's funding is about 22% of that. And that funding is allocated from headquarters to the region and then out from the region to communities based on a mix of methodologies. So a historical amount, and then where there is time limited amounts, like from budget 17, 19, and 24, we use general population. So that's 18 and over of registered status population. We've talked a lot over the years about changing, rebasing, but again, we're very cautious. Without more money in the mix, which is the number one priority, we don't want to start, pulling threads in case something unintended would unravel, because the main issue is the extent of the funding. But there's sort of that two-part methodology. So that's the big headline there. And that the Ontario portion of the national program is 97 million. This just breaks that down a little bit. The red bar is Ontario and the blue bar is national, just to show how it fits in. The variation there is because some years, the first bars had COVID additional time limited investment to really target students and the disruption. So you'll see a bit of a spike there. And in the red line, you'll see a bit of variation from year to year. And that's because some regions don't use all of their PSE allocation, which is surprising, but it does happen for various legitimate reasons. Ontario is one of the biggest users of any redistribution we have and always has been. So where there's a higher amount one year, it's not that the following year was cut. It's that some years there was additional money available within ISK, and we worked with our regional offices and through them partners to say, can regions absorb this funding? And Ontario always has. And this, all of this represents both the A base, which is technical lingo for our ongoing existing salary that we get anyway, budget, and then the time limited, which is the budget 19, the budget 24 investments, which have different durations. So right now we're in year 2 of a 3-year investment from budget 24 that will expire or sunset, to use another government technical term, at the end of 26-27. So when I talked about the chances that we have to make those big recommendations, those big advocacy in the way that departments can do that within our system through our minister to the Minister of Finance, it will be as budget 24 is planned for sunsetting, that's when we go in for renewal or new investments. And I can say we have recommended new investments, like I said, every year since 2015-16 in PSE. We haven't seen them materialize, but that doesn't mean that the work doesn't go anywhere or that we shouldn't be keeping it up and tinkering with it to make it the most aligned with whatever the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister of the day is thinking. And PSE does that really well. So it's just a bit more on the methodology there that I talked about. Where population comes in, it's the status registered population. And then there's a little graphic here on the growth. So Ontario hasn't grown at exactly the same rate as national, but it's very close. So again, that just shows you the population growth, but both drives the needs. They are also linked in the lifelong learning concept and in adult learning to secondary completion, which we're also seeing trending up in. That just creates a success pressure on PSE. And so talking about the population, but also the feeder students who are eligible is really important. And that's something that our data collection doesn't really capture. And also there are students we know that are funded through other programs and may not be funded through PSSP. They're also a part of that story that our own data tools don't get at, but are really, really important to tell that bigger story. And then this is just the underpinning of the population there. Now, this is a really important slide for everything that comes after it. These are the reporting rates on PSSP. And you can see over time a decline in the reporting rates. So the most recent year reported here, we have 48% of Ontario's PSE reporting in and finalized. We get the challenges when you're supporting students on the front line about filling in a government form. We totally understand that. However, there is an implication, and it's a very apparent implication in the headquarters world that I work in, that we have less than half of the story about students that are funded. Not reporting, it's not going to change the funding flow, but it is actually blocking some of the stories and the recommendations that we make within our system up through the deputy and the minister of finance. It really weakens the recommendations that we've been making. And we give all of the context that, feeding the government reporting machine and the frustrations with the education information system are real. To say that this isn't just because it's not seen as valued, it's a priorities thing. But it is a real thing that I really urge you to look at with your communities, with your teams, and with your resources, because that's really hampering both the integrity of the data and our ability to make recommendations based on the context of what I'm rolling up. So all of the following slides represents, a 5-year average, but as you can see, that reporting has declined. The earlier years there, the high bars, those are a COVID era, and the department changed a lot of reporting requirements, knowing that the frontline work was most important. So a number of those reports that are older have been deleted as a reporting obligation. So that's to take that constantly hanging older reports when student safety was the primary thing. Those have been taken out. That's why the rates are really high there. But the decline since, it's these last 3 years that are going to be looked at immediately by the next budget ask. So that's sort of a bit of a plea that if there's anything the department can do to help navigate the portal, the education information system, the DCIs, let the region and let us know. I'll just take a step back too. So part of the reason headquarters is here is we have a bilateral relationship with the Chiefs of Ontario, as we do with the Assembly of First Nations. But that bilateral meeting lets me and my team spend more time on Ontario stuff because of the work we do with the AFN. So everything that happens nationally happens at a bit of a different level in Ontario. And so I've really appreciated the ability to get back into Ontario stuff because it's really, like I said, where I learned. So getting into some of the meaty stuff, and I don't want to talk forever because I know you'll have likely some questions. We've just sampled some data here to give you a sense of what it looks like, what we see from your own data. And so this is one of the ones I was talking about. Like, do you see your reality in these and the following slides? Do you see things that are not apparent from this reporting? Is there more reality that you're like, that's not what I'm living. I'm not an 86%. I'm not a 6% kind of thing. But what this is about is this talks about students who applied and received the full amount versus partial, and some students who applied but did not receive any post secondary funding. That bottom one has been a really challenging one. It's not required reporting. It's an option on the forms, but it's also really important. And that gets to some of that gap story. And the MNP costing comes in there too, because these are our students. This is what the projected cost is. And then the higher bars here talk about the ones who were funded to some extent, and then the ones who weren't. We are always asked how many students are out there and not funded. And we can answer that with the data we collect, but that's a live question. So if that's a really key area of interest for your own leadership or for your own work, and you can share anecdotal stuff with us on that, that's really important qualitative information. So when I talk about quantitative, it's this, and the qualitative is what's really happening or what isn't this showing. But this shows a very high proportion of full amount of post-secondary. That is higher than national. And also what this, and some of the things that this implies too, we want to make sure that we're right. So the more students that are funded fully likely means there are less students overall funded. And that's one of those extremes where a 5-year average in these kind of rates is that one student at 100% used all of the budget, right? Or is it 10 students at $10? Or is it, 100 students at $1? And that's something we've really struggled with to tell the story, because PSSSP and the decisions that communities make, it's not 100% for every student. We know that. But is it a dollar, and is that dollar the make or break over and above what OSAP may provide, or grants, or other bursaries? That part of the story, we're completely blind to that in the hard data reporting. That's one of the soft kind of data stories, is the vision that all eligible students should be funded at 100%. Well, that's a very different type of projected costing. Or what kind of decisions are happening out there? Are other sources exhausted first, and then communities use PSSSP to close some of the small gaps? And that's sort of the analogy of, is it, one student at 100, 10 at $10, or 100 at $1? That's a very different story for real students and real communities, and the hard decisions that you make. That's also affected by the extent of the volume of the money, but also, even if everything was fully funded in our wildest dreams world, we know these kinds of decisions, because we've been told by a lot of the people in the room, would still, be there, that navigating function. Anyway, so this is the kind of dialogue we have when we look at this data. And it makes us uncomfortable to talk about, real partners and real students without communities and you there. But just so you know, this is how we kind of approach this, and the questions we ask ourselves, and where we run out of road to brief up on. So just to share a bit of how this actually is used and worked, and where it goes. And again, that goes back to the reporting thresholds as well. For data integrity, we've done work with sort of data scientists, and a reporting threshold of 85% is really where the data becomes reliable and usable. And like we saw, we're at 48%. So that's challenging. This is another interesting slide where it shows where the reported costs are showing up. And this bears out what some of the earlier presenters talked about, and what you know in your bones, that the living allowances are really high. And that's one of the things, as living goes up and the number of students may go up or not, and the budget is fixed, something's got to give. Well, you can't pay less tuition, you can't pay less living expenses, so the students get squeezed out. And that is the most compelling story we try to always say, because it's such a simple thing. And that's something that Gina Wilson, our now former deputy minister, talked about a lot from her experience. And again, that's the kind of stuff we know it's true because you've told us, kind of thing. And so this is also interesting, and there's a link to the MNP. So this 14,000 number is what's reported back. So this is the average cost expended from your reporting. We're not saying that's what it actually costs or should cost, it's what's being spent. The MNP tool can talk about that projected cost. There's also other sources that we've used in some of our modeling. StatsCan produces annual costs of post-secondary tuition and books and living. And so that's a part of the mix of what we put together when we make these recommendations. And some of the institutes in Ontario and elsewhere have told us, and we know that keeping tuition down is a really key part of what institutes do as their service and their mandates from communities. But we don't want that to skew the costing, right? Because other tuition is much higher. So just the takeaway headline on this one is that 14,000-ish is what's reported back as a cost. We're not saying that is sufficient. We're not saying that's what it should cost. We're saying that's what's spent. So that's a little different facet than some of the other conversations. But the really high living allowance does come as a surprise to folks. And again, not everybody at headquarters has field experience or community experience, and their central agencies, as we call them, finance and Privy Council office, certainly don't have that experience. And so we do have to do some sort of myth busting. The assumption is that tuition is the highest cost right, for a student. But it isn't. And it certainly isn't for students from remote communities who have to travel or move to higher cost centers, either in the north or in the south. So it's making the data real with your stories. Again, I'm harping on that, but that's what we try to do with this. And we always try to do it based on a real person telling us. Every briefing I do, I think, okay, I've heard so-and-so from such and such community. Show me this. They've educated me on this, and I'm okay to carry that info forward. The other question we get a lot is, well, PSSP isn't designed right now to be universal. And I know that's very contentious, and there are a lot of strong views. We also have had some leadership over the years. Minister Bennett was very public about saying that every eligible student should have the money ready for them for PSE. So all of these views are out and around, but we do get asked a lot about what other sources are First Nation students drawing on. We work with Canada Student Loans and Grants and the Financial Assistance Program. We work with some provincial, OSAP a bit more than other regions, but OSAP generally tends to be pretty accessible, both as bureaucrats, but also we've seen them in the communities. So we have a bit more insight into OSAP. And we also maintain the Indigenous Bursary Search Tool. Inspire is going to be here this afternoon. They provide a stream. Again, it's not whether we're not saying that there should be multiple streams or there should be all these buckets sought. We're saying these are the facts. These other sources are out there. And we get asked a lot about how these programs interact. And a question I get frequently, and it makes me nervous, is, isn't this duplicative? And we say, absolutely not. There is no federal source of post-secondary funding that's meant to be 100%. Even the grants in the Canada Financial Student Aid Program are not all or meant to be 100%. And so it has to be a complementary landscape, and PSSP plays an important role in that under First Nations control. And like I said, we know that can be the make or break amount after other sources are pursued. But again, once we get to the different kind of costing models, going back to what Mr. Bennett always said, it is viable to do a costing model for every eligible student as the waterline. Everyone who could be in PSE should have funding made available, then you see who accesses. That would be an amazing situation. We're not close to that. But again, talking about the kinds of things we do with all this and the kind of conversations that happen. But this slide is there just to talk about some of the other sources. That's something we're blind to as well. So in that slide that talked about the fully or the partially funded, any information on what is the rest of that pie coming together, what's working, what's not working, so that we can connect back with Employment Social Development Canada and provinces to say there's something that's maybe a navigation issue, or students don't know where to start, or there's different, political views or different information that might be outdated out there. Years ago, ESDC waived PSSP income as counting against the Canada Student Loans and Grants. That was a huge hurdle that was cleared, but it was very hard to communicate out. And we still hear some confusion about that sometimes. And what that really refers to is if a student had PSSP, it worked against them in another federal stream. So they cleared that. ESDC doesn't count PSSP income or funding as income pre-study period or during study period, but little things like that, which was a big achievement in and of itself. Again, it's that constant needing to, how do we make sure that info is out there so that, students are not going on outdated information, and how can we do a better job at that? I'll get back to that in a little bit too, just to get some thoughts on navigating the landscape. So here's some extra stuff on gender, which is really interesting, about how it bears out. This is all stuff but again, we included this not because we think this. It's really to prompt you to say, oh, that's interesting. My community's not like that. Or my community is 2 students. And so an average age is not representative of my community, or the gender mix is not represented here. And my reference to ages for this slide too. So, it's interesting data, and it tells us something, and we have to use it, but what's your reaction to it? That's the kind of human take. If it's a small community and there's, half a dozen funded students and 4 of them are 50, that's not going to represent your experience, right? Or a community that prioritizes secondary grads at 18, 17, 18, that may not represent your priority area. So this is just sort of a summary of what we see in the data as the Ontario student, by gender, by age, the type of studies, and that kind of thing. So again, the question is, this is what we have to work with. Is it representative? Is there more we can add to it from you? We run the data reporting extracts. We can do them live. So one report from a very large community, and I'm thinking of some in this room, right, with some of the biggest in the country, in Ontario, can really change these stats. And that's something else that we watch for too. At the same way that, a very small community may not be as represented in these averages. Here's some information on marital status and dependence. Again, all the bits and pieces that can drive funding and funding decisions in multiple programs. This is what we see. And it bears out. I mean, a lot of this is what we generally know. It's also what a lot of senior management kind of expect from either their own families or working in ESDC or working in other areas. But again, it's not going to represent, an average isn't going to represent everybody. Now, moving to the institutions, which is such a strong part of the world in Ontario. The number of Indigenous institutes is really, really, really interesting, and we rely on our partnership with your institutions, your institutes, and the IIC for who they represent to really give us that insight. And to give a practical example of that, a lot of the COVID investments for students and institutions were directly informed by Ontario because of the number and the diversity and the hard work that you do and were doing at the peak of early COVID. We were able to call on institute partners in Ontario to tell us what is happening for students, what and how fast do we need to scramble to get that injection, students losing, rent or losing and not having travel funding to get home, those kinds of things. So that's just a little sort of retroactive thank you of how much I appreciate the info we get from you. This gives a highlight of the top institutions, national and Ontario. So this is of all national institutions, these are the top attended by Ontario students. So we have so much data, I have to make sure I'm talking about the right slide. So some interesting stuff there about which region those are in. Does that imply something? Does it show something or does it not show something? This one's, I find this one particularly interesting. So it's the top 5 Ontario institutions attended by Ontario students. The previous slide was the top, institutes of the highest total Ontario First Nations. See, I've confused myself. Again, just different facets of the same thing. But this one is interesting, and the top 4 of the top 5 are Ontario institutes. So that bears out a lot of the info that we know about priorities as well. And again, we can dig deeper. We can list all institutes. We can do this in different ways. This is just literally, we kind of got together and grabbed the data that we had. And then just a bit more of that. Where are students attending, right? And the story behind this and the previous slides is, well, each of those institutes have a very different cost profile depending on where their home community is. And that gets into some of the MMP work. We can't come up with the answer to all of those things, right? Part of it is what you know. Part of it is the hard decisions on your allocations. Part of it is what the MMP project is trying to get at as well. And somewhere in the mix of all the soup of all those kind of bits of data and analysis, trying to land on what's the most compelling story. And then this is level of attainment by gender. Again, and each slide could be way bigger, way more granular or not. I just want to show this is the kind of stuff we can produce it's your own data, and we can produce it back out relatively easily. And again, some of this bears out, what we know, but there are some differences too in Ontario versus national that are interesting. And again, this is all going to be provided electronically and on paper. This is areas of study. And this is this is national and Ontario. So it gives you an interesting picture of what are priorities for youth, for students, as well as what programs communities might be prioritizing as well. Again, we know that's happening, but I wouldn't ever draw conclusions on this because that gets into something a bit more abstract from us. So without a conversation with folks in the room, I would never say or guess why this is here, but it shows where the students are attending. But we know that there's other stories behind that. Health human resources is another huge area that we hear a lot about from our colleagues in the health sector as well. And that's reflected here, but the need in community for professionals, for teachers, for engineers and that bears out a bit in some of the stats, but we're asked a lot about that too. Like, show us that there are a lot of young women in STEM. We said, well, okay, we'll show you these kind of stats, but we can't honestly answer that question or why there aren't more in STEM. That's an even weirder question. And so we push back when we get those kind of assumption-based or questions that would push us into making assumptions about your own decisions. And so there's lots of questions we get that we say, well, we can't answer that. We're not well placed, but we can raise it at Belt or we can raise it with other partners. And this is just about student achievement. And this one is really, really encouraging, right? It's completed the semester. So this is about perseverance. It's about progression with all of the other stuff that are barriers for students. And that's how we brief on this. We say, we know all of these challenges and hurdles. They're hard decisions. It's uphill for students to navigate, but it's still with all of those challenges bearing out. And that's really powerful. And that's the kind of thing that ministers and central agencies really, really like. And also that's the kind of thing that we share up. So when we get your annual reports, when you share them with us, either by your authority or by your students or your institution, we send those to everybody. We send them to the Prime Minister's office, the Privy Council, finance, because we want anyone being briefed on all this to visualize a real student and a real institution. And if that can be an Ontario one, all the better. But this is just the kind of stuff we see. And then this is just a bit more on that, about the standing. And then a summary slide that goes over the last slides. So this is plugging the value of reporting, which I know is could be a bit of an eye roll, but it does really matter. And that's why I'm trying to tell you where and how we use this. And then and it's not as simple as just saying, please report more. Like if there are real frustrations on support and timeliness and the system and all of that, tell us. Because the benefit of me being back at headquarters, I have a different reach than I did when I was in the region. The data system falls under me. The data production falls under me, and elementary and secondary and post-secondary. So I can influence some things to help clear barriers in a way that I may not have always been able to. So not that it's just about me, but there's things I'm trying to show that there's things that I can do and press on for folks. This is the institutional program. Again, very unsatisfactory to everybody involved, including us, that this program has not changed. The story is very clear in all of our past briefings that this program was created in the 80s in a very different landscape. It didn't contemplate Indigenous institutes, which is, a huge success in Ontario, despite the lack of a program designed to it. And basically, we use this program in our transition briefings to say this is an example of where partners and reality and the field of education has outstripped the federal government's rules and tools and budgets. So we know the problems with PSPP. And again, we're trying, it's always in there with the recommendations on student and institution. We link them all because of what we've learned here, but that just gives the bit of the breakdown and the scale and scope for Ontario. And then this just talks about, like I've said, the importance of the institutes in general, but in Ontario, it's very unique the way communities have built and support these institutes and the institutes that buy in for services, a lot of the wraparounds and things that we've talked about. That's one other link back to the MNP stuff. And I know there'll be discussion about administration fees. My first sort of instinct on that is I wouldn't automatically lump everything into administrative because PSSP has always had the student-based stuff, the tuition, the books, the transportation, and the guidance counseling and some of those other supports. They've always been in the authority. We know they aren't always activated because there isn't enough funding to do everything on that list. And it goes back to the comment about, well, you can make it as broad as you want, but if there's, not enough money to do everything, it doesn't matter what's in the authority. But I would, as you're discussing, I wouldn't lump everything in just as admin because PSSP already has that layer of that guidance counseling, that navigating that wraparound. I wouldn't hesitate to create that into whatever recommendations and advocacy as a distinct layer of the components of PSSP because they've always been there. They've always been recognized as one of the conditions for success and the uniqueness of the type of employees and professionals and services more than just the allocation work. And just to not list that as important as the other components. The administration is very important because of the overhead costs, but the general administration is usually understood in government world, but it normally isn't it usually wouldn't cover the kind of unique needs that we're hearing about for that. It's called guidance and counseling, but it's that anything navigating the human touch to keep a student progressing, the check-ins that students do with your authorities, that kind of thing. So just not to lose that because it's already in the structure and it's recognized as an important part of it. And if we're building this big story, let it be as complex as possible of all the bits. And that's it. And so that's a contact. And so the regional office wasn't able to be here today, and they know what we're presenting, and the data flows in through them, and they're much closer to you. And when I say regional office, I mean Susan and Rhonda weren't able to be here from Thunder Bay, but regular regional staff are always available, and we're really in touch. But again, the reason we're here is because of the unique bilateral relationship with the Chiefs of Ontario, which is really really exciting because this is the province that stuff's happening in, really, and we can use that. So thank you for your time and attention. Happy to take any questions now or in follow-up. And just again to offer, we can always produce this data in any way, more, less, different, based on your own needs as a type of service. The terms of reference with OBELT have a data sharing component in it. So this is where it makes it real.
Hello, I'm Leona Scanlon, and I'm here representing Anishinaabe Nation today. My question is about the cost per student. The amount you mentioned seems incredibly low and doesn't reflect our cost per student. So I'm wondering a couple things actually. Why there's no travel costs incorporated into our budget? Because we're flying people out from remote communities and it just gets more expensive year after year. And we don't see a travel allocation in our budget. And also with the opening up of Bill C3, the government has opened up a whole new bunch of eligible students who can apply for funding. But the new pool of students did not come with a pool of money. So can you tell me how you could address that?
Yes, for sure. So that 13,000 that was in the slide, that's the average expenditure reported back. But we have to be very careful, and we do flag that when we talk about it. We're not saying that's what it actually cost. That's what PSSSP's expenditure by communities was reported as. And really, like, to put it crudely, that's all that was spent on average for those expenses, even though the costs were likely higher and were met by parents, met by other federal support programs. And that's the key interaction with the MNP. That MNP project is interesting because it lets a cost be projected based on real costs, and they work kind of together. So if the real projected cost in a perfect world was, 20,000, what we're seeing is that communities are only able to spend 13, right? And so that's what that reporting back is. It's an expenditure versus actual real cost versus projected cost. In a perfect world, we'll get to a place where the actual cost drive the projection and drive the budget, but we're just not there yet. We're stuck with the old PSSSP, and it having to go as far as it can, as frustrating as that is. That links, I'll answer your Bill C3. So there's a historic amount in the allocations that go out that isn't affected by population directly, but there is a chunk of your annual allocation for that time limited money. So all of the budget 24 funding is driven by that population share. And so where the population changes or where it changes unevenly, that will have a distribution. We're watching that. We will start to see that change. And it's one of the drivers. When we talk about population, we have to say, and this is what the implication of higher population is. It needs to be linked to the actual uptake in users. But right now, you're right, there wasn't any additional funding for any number of decisions that increase the population. So it's a real pressure internally that we know about on multiple programs. And then finally, your travel allocation. What is received by your community is a pot of funding for anything that's eligible. So there is travel is eligible and the funds can be spent on it. But I know what you're saying, that there isn't an identified travel allocation queued to the high costs in the north, right? It's much more blunt. It's a lump of money, mostly historical, a bit population based, that gets handed to communities to cover all the individual decisions. Again, not satisfactory, but ideally, if we can get to a place where the next work ties the cost drivers on a real basis to what the allocation should be, that's where a modern program would be expected to be, and we're not.
Good, good morning. I've been attending these meetings for approximately the last 10 years, and every year it's the same question that I ask. When are we going to be able to report on an actual academic year as opposed to a fiscal year? Not to mention the calendar year. I mean, like, it's confusing. And what I find frustrating is the fact that we have to report until the end of March, but students, their term doesn't end until the end of April, sometimes May. So you're going to have to report in the next report, the last 2 months, month or 2 months for that student for the previous year. So you're not really getting a true number for the academic year for the students' costs. And that just frustrates me, like, personally, because I have to include them in the following year, but they're not really being funded in that year. They're being funded for the previous year. So now I have to create two budgets. So that's when I keep asking that year after year after year. When is that going to be considered reporting on an academic year from September until the end of April, and then the summer or whatever?
Yeah, that's a really really important thing, because it means there isn't a one-stop shop of the full cycle, right? In elementary and secondary, we've sort of to get around that, we slip a year. So the reporting is always past. There's problems that come with that because it's not live, but at least it captures the school year. That's something that we'll look at with the team about.
Good morning. I'm just wondering if you can let me know when the historical funding allocation was decided. What year was that?
It would have been in the 80s. So some of you I know have personal experience in that era because you've shared it with me. And the former national regional chief also had told me personally about some of her activist work. Bragging against the cost from like a generation ago, when we're trying to show central agencies and the political side who aren't familiar with the human services in the way a lot of provincial colleagues are, quite frankly. We start our briefings by saying ISK is a municipality, a province, and a federal government every minute of every day on virtually every program. And like it or not, you're now the fancy title of a very province-like program. And it takes a lot of shift to get people understanding and comfortable in that world. So all that to say, it's an old baseline from the 80s that is virtually impossible to decipher. The plan is to seek more money for a modern sort of base, one way or another.
Yeah, hi. My name's Elaine. I'm from Saugeen First Nations. So I'm the post-secondary support person. I noticed in your presentation that when it comes to actual costs, the one that really jumps out at me is the actual cost what students have to pay for rent. And when we you budget out our students and what they're going to receive, we can't give them what they are going to pay for rent. So in your projections, it's not accurate. Is there some way that you could maybe put in when we're reporting our costs, the actual costs of all the students, what they actually are paying? We're only putting in certain amount of money that we have to divvy up.
Yeah.
So you're not getting a true reflection of what costs are.
Yeah.
I don't even know if it was mentioned that the MNP project is actually reporting on actual costs, or are they just reporting on costs that we actually spend on each student?
So there's a couple different ways those numbers exist. So the 13,000, 14,000 in the slide is what's reported as spent. So like we talked about, you can put it this way, that's all communities on average can contribute to living expenses. That's not saying that's what they are or should be. The MNP project is a projection, right? So that would be one way to show, but it's an allocation, like a planning tool. So if you have 5 students and you know where they are and you know the living cost, you know what the goal cost is that has to be fit into PSSP. The problem with the current program is the allocation is not driven by actual costs. We know that it has to meet real costs, but because it's that mix of historical and population based, it creates that real pinch that you're talking about. So there are ways to tell us the real cost, even in just the narrative of the reporting, or in just sort of the narrative box on the DCI to say, I'm reporting that I could only spend X. These students' real bills were X plus whatever. That is really, really important. And the bigger the community and the more consistent that reporting is, it starts to show that gap. But we don't do a great job at capturing the actual costs because the budget is what it is right now. That said, we don't just sit around. We look to what the real costs are when we are doing that recommendation for budget investments. So we know what StatsCan lists as the average costs of post-secondary in general. We know what institutions are charging. We know other socioeconomic data. And that's the kind of stuff that M&P used. Like when they plug in that cost of living amount per student, that comes from a real place. And we use that in our recommendations. It isn't used in our allocation right now in the program, but it's really important. So anywhere, any way you can tell us the real costs of a real student. And that there's one slide in there about students who were not funded. That's not a mandatory reporting field. And that's also why it's such a tiny number. But there is a way in the existing data collection instrument to talk about the underserved or unserved students. And again, that's a question we get every year from someone in the government. How many students are out there who could be supported by PSSP? We get there from like anecdotal conversations, but the more you can help with that, the more it'll help the story.
I also feel like that's a really hard number to get to, even for, the people in this room, because when you have all these restrictions on the funding and the limited funding, there's, level 4 learner out there who, could apply, but they know there's not enough funding to ever get to them. So they're not applying. So it's really hard for people to estimate what that number is of not funded when they're not actually even coming to their door because they know they're not going to get the money.
Yeah, because you only report on the students that are funded. The way we try to get around that is we look at, some big communities report that extra information in the country. So that gives us sort of an uptake rate. And we say, okay, what if that was the reality of every community? This is, again, just to get a calculation so we can land on a number to ask for. We also look at general population uptake rates. We look at different segments of the population, remote, rural, general population. Okay, so there's, 100 people and the PSC uptake rate is X percent. Does that give us an estimate of how many First Nation students who have graduated secondary, could be assumed to be eligible for PSC? And then does that become the target population that we say that's who should be resourced so that they can go? But it's not perfect. We have to look at other sets of socioeconomic data in the absence of collecting that live, really.
Hi, Anne Marie again from Garden River.
Hi.
I have lots of comments in that, so I'm just going to pick on a couple. But one is, if you actually looked at our report that we have to do, those fields are so limited, we can't give you accurate data. So we pick and choose. Which area does this program fit under? So when you say there's so many health students, they may not be health students because there's nothing that actually describes what they're really in. So we've said that for many years. Like I said, I've been around a long time. I've been part of EIS. I've been a part of having paper reports, floppy disk reports, the disk reports, the USB reports, and now we're online. So I've seen it all, and I've said it all the time. I'm not accurately reporting on my students from Garden River because ISC limits the data that we can put in. I've asked over and over for user-friendly fields so that Garden River, I collect more data than you guys ever want, so that I could actually have that in a database that I want, but that's never been done. The bill, I'll go to the bill now. The bills, all the influx of our new members that we got over the years, starting back with Bill C-31. That was the first and the only time that we got extra money
True.
for new members. How long ago is that? You would think the government could have figured this out by now, that anytime you guys are considering bringing in new members for us, that should be an automatic side by side. We have to have money also. I don't take that reason that you are still learning and you have to figure this out now. That was back, when was Bill C-31? Like Indian Affairs, Diane, all the names that I've been through my work, like you guys got to do a lot better. And I know you have high turnover and you guys have, because there's always someone new that we have to tell our same story to. There has to be a way to keep historical knowledge so that new people come in and they already have that. They don't have to go work a whole year to get educated on what's already been done and try to reinvent the wheel. When are we ever going to move forward? It's automatic. We're getting new members coming pretty soon. Give us more money for that. But we also needed more money for all the other students that we now have, because guaranteed, soon as they get their status, they're applying for post-secondary sponsorship. Like before they even have the actual paper in hand, they're already calling us, asking us, how do I get this? I'm told I get college and university paid for now. It's like, I didn't even know there was status yet. But we're getting those inquiries daily, but we don't have the money. How are we going to fund that when the government is still telling us we got to figure out how to do this? But it's because your data is wrong. If you would just talk to the technicians, we could tell you the things that are wrong in your reports. You would have so much more meaningful data if you just talk to us and not just your level that you already admitted have never worked on the field or have never been a part of. So come and talk to us instead of just talking at your own big tables.
Yeah. So if you have all of those extra fields, absolutely bring them. And that's the kind of thing that we saw when I was in the region, and Bernie's here and knows it. I can see her nodding from here, right? And the team. So bring us those extra fields. Also, I have to say, if we came out with a DCI with hundreds or 1,000 study fields to tick box, there'd be just as much reporting burden. So we do have to balance it. You're telling me that it's out of balance, that it's too simple. So if you have additional info, because it's useful for you, share it. Send it to us, send it to Bernie, so that we can at least have that for Garden River.
If you talk to my regional, what are they called, Bernie? The one, or who's here, Christina? The person I send my
Christina
report to,
Busby.
my annual report to.
Yeah.
Every year when they have to call me because I've had to creatively report someone that was part-time, say at Sioux College, they took a course at Sioux College, a valid course, eligible course at Sioux College. Then they're taking a program or courses at Algoma University. Or there's the Indigenous Institutes. FNTI was always a problem to report with another school. Every year I have to explain how I reported what I reported. And every year that person says, yes, I agree with you. It should be better. But for now, this is what we have to do. And there's still no changes. So like I waste my breath by giving these examples and recommendations because no one is bringing it forward. I don't know if it's that person, but I know that person struggles also when they have to call me every year and say, okay, tell me again why you did this. And then we have our annual conversation and then we go on with our day. So there's no one that's listening or that is listening that can actually do anything about it.
Yeah. So we're listening. There's things we can do. We can change the DCIs. We can change the way the data is presented. So that's me. The more money is not me. It is not the minister. It's the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister. So when I talk about like we make recommendations, that's code for pushing on the political decision makers who make the money, right? And that we know that. And so what you're sharing, Emery, is will let me say, this is what our partners told us when I went with the limited things I can do to talk to them. This is what I heard. Also on the population increases, I can tell you we've made recommendations each time there's been an increase since 85, where the population is a driver for allocation. So that we make them, but we aren't the decision makers on those. But I can tell you that that is a key part of what we do when we're looking at making these recommendations to improve PSSSP, because you can't have more people and not the matching money. We completely agree with that. But again, that's beyond certain decisions.
Hi, I'd just like to make another comment. Looking at your slide here where it says post-secondary student support program funding in the millions during COVID, I'll say that, yeah, we didn't have enough money to, cover everything for the students. We did what we could, but that was still, quite extensive, the kind of money that we received. And it did help a bit more. Then after COVID was over, boom,
Yeah.
funding was reduced. So now that created another barrier. That created more of a gap.
Yeah.
And now you're here to tell us that what it is that you're planning on doing is trying to close it. But that was a creation by the department, not by us, trying to make the allocations. So why is it that the funding was reduced when, the students were more happy with what they were getting at the time when they had to stay home and couldn't go to school? Like, do we have to, perpetuate that kind of advice to keep on, we'll go stay home? You know what I mean? That kind of thing. There's a lot of people that can't do that kind of learning. They have to be in school. So now the reduced funding is just creating another barrier. Why is it that they couldn't maintain that level of funding for each community, what they were getting in the extra COVID funding?
Yeah. And even for the students who return to full-time studies, we see and we know that there's a sort of a legacy impact of being out of the system for 1 or 2 years, right? We see that a lot in ESE, but it's real in PSE. So it's a real thing. And again, that can go somewhere. Like I can put that feedback somewhere. I can't generate the money, but I can certainly take all of this stuff. So this is what I meant when hearing it live. However, you need to present it. It all matters and it all goes somewhere. I can promise that.
Better if I turned it on. So we got one more question before lunch. I'm gonna turn it over to Paige.
Ani, Paige Sillaby with the Anishinaabe Nation. Thank you for your presentation, Jonathan. I think a key takeaway from that was highlighting the importance of the reporting and the current status that we're at with many of those reports not being submitted. I guess my question for you is just to seek an update on the 5-year education investment under budget 2021. If there's any plans from ISK to reinvest, any new investments, and what First Nations can expect from Ontario going into the 26-27 fiscal.
So you're asking about budget 21, which was elementary and secondary investments? Just so I didn't catch all the end of your question.
There was also adult education investments in there.
Yes. Okay. So we have the star of adult ed. Sam is going to present on adult ed, but yes, that is time limited funding. And there's a huge risk that comes with time limited funding, right? Because students don't just shut themselves off after a big budget announcement ends. So yes, all the work that Sam has been doing with with communities on what adult ed is now will be everything that we show for when we do what's called a renewal. So getting the year before it expires, we're going to have to start saying, this is what it's done. You can't pull the plug on this investment. It's lifelong learning. It's the bridge between secondary and post-secondary, all of these things. But right now on the books, that money is only 5 years. There are ways to extend it. School food was just extended. It was only a 5-year, but so we're hoping, we don't want to ever see any funding go down or end, but it will take a very formal federal budget ask for the renewal, and we will share all the stuff we've learned about what it's done in 5 years. But also that's where your advocacy comes in. You can lobby politicians that we can't. And so as we get closer to that, there'll be more and more on the renewal that'll come through OBELT and meetings like this. Thanks. And sorry for delaying your lunch because I talk too much.
No, thank you so much, Jonathan, for coming and bringing this information and getting feedback from our First Nations in Ontario. So it's a small token of our appreciation.
Thank you.
Thank you. So a little bit of business. I've talked to Samantha, who's presenting right after lunch. She says hers is a little more condensed than her slot, so we will begin lunch at this time and we'll reassemble and start right at 1:25. Have a good lunch.
It's all in me who wants to wrap around your dreams and with dreams you love to. You know that you feel that and what you know. it is. 'Cause I had a dream that someday I would just fly away. And I only knew I could stay. So I had a dream that I just fly away. Oh.
Alrighty, good afternoon, everybody. I'll give you about 1 minute to get settled, and then we'll be bringing up our next presenter. All right, so I hope everybody had a good lunch. Their belly's full. If you see your elbow partner starting to nod off, please just give them a little pinch, keep them awake after a heavy meal. But it's an honor and a pleasure to introduce our next presenter, who will be presenting on the adult education formula, Sam Gray from ISK. I can let you know that we've worked with her over the last year or two, and she really does have a passion to hopefully push this forward. She's a strong advocate to get this right, and she really is accessible. So again, after the presentation and even the questions, even though Sam works at the level she does, if you want to get in touch with Sam, you let us know and she will definitely make time for you. So without further ado, I'd like to call upon Sam Gray.
Hopefully I can figure this out. All right, we're already rolling. Thank you so much to Angel and Mick for the invitation. It's fantastic to be in the room again. I got to present on adult education at the forum in March of last year, where we got so much information. We got to have so many conversations that really informed what we did for the past year. I'm here specifically to talk a little bit about the investment for folks that might be hearing about it for the first time. We don't get to talk to PSE as much as we could, as much as we maybe should. Folks that are representing PSE institutions or are in PSE positions. And we know that this intersects with the work that you do. So just talking about the investment a little bit to begin with, we're going right back to the beginning, budget 2021, announced $350 million over 5 years. It's incremental operational and student supports. It was an intended expansion of the K-12 program. So really what it did was remove the upper age limit so that anyone over the age of 4 could appear on the nominal roll, could be funded as a learner. In Ontario, the adult age is 22 and above. So you would sort of age out of support. Sorry, my glasses. We applied the broadest possible interpretation. So this was intended to be a first step toward First Nations visions of lifelong learning. It focuses down really on the adult education part, focusing on secondary. So it looks at ungraduated and graduated adults. So if they hold a credential and they want to go back and upgrade, if they don't yet hold a credential, they want to go back and complete, or if they want to put the pieces in place to get there to do that. So it goes right back to literacy and basic skills, adult basic education, life skills programming that helps you put the pieces in place. Doesn't have to be literacy and numeracy. It can be the skills that you need to really be successful. So again, it was supposed to be an initial step. We know that this isn't the entirety of lifelong learning, but we are making sure that we're putting the pieces in place to get adult learners past that secondary piece. So what the investment was meant to do was take a look at what was a very uneven landscape nationally. The map shows the regions in red are regions that had no prior support for adults before the investment. The regions in green had prior support for the investment. We see Ontario in blue as what we were calling a semi-supported region. So adults were eligible, but provincial comparability was extremely limited, and they weren't getting the support that they needed. So on that 5-year timeline, because we got 5 years in budget 2021, in year 1, we started implementation and expansion funding, realizing that it takes a lot of resources, it takes time, it takes people in positions to figure out how this programming is going to be delivered if it's not already in place. So we started that funding in 22-23. Year 2, we started flowing instructional funding. As soon as we saw learners on the nominal roll, we began to flow money to support their studies under the adult education investment. Year 3, 24-25, we had adult basic education come onto the landscape. So literacy and basic skills, adult basic education, those preparation pieces. We introduced new full-time equivalents. So we wanted to make sure that we recognize that adults are not frequently enrolled in a full course load. They have a number of other responsibilities they're trying to meet. They're doing a lot of balancing work. So we introduced new FTEs to figure out where they were really doing the learning, how they were doing it, when they were there. Year 4, this most recent year, we introduced a new funding formula, which I'll be talking about in a minute. And we are right now right on the cusp of year 5, which is the final year that we have funding for. So again, what falls under adult education from our perspective is secondary completion. That kind of goes without saying. If you don't already have that parchment, you don't already have the diploma and you want it. Secondary upgrading, you're going back to get a course that you didn't know you needed at the time. Now you need it to get into a program that you want, or you're going in to bring your grades up to meet a certain threshold. Secondary preparation and skills building, again, not just literacy and numeracy, but all of the different skills that go into re-entering a classroom and being comfortable there and being able to flourish there. And then secondary equivalency. So folks that are delivering programming to help with CAEC, you're going to get your high school completion credential, GED being gone now. And in Toronto, there's also the ACE, Ontario region. Stephanie brought that to us. Ontario now has its own PSE generated credential for equivalency. So those funding streams and mechanisms, the adult education investment as a whole, we see on the far left here, branches off into implementation and expansion funding to get the programs up and running, to get them piloted, to do outreach to learners, to develop curriculum, and then the enrollment-driven instructional funding. Under implementation and expansion, we saw communities selecting to use a K-12 mechanism. If that's where the program development and that's where the program delivery was happening, there was an option to flow that money to a PSE that they were working with. The enrollment-driven instructional funding goes for adults that are in regular programming. That means they've joined a secondary classroom that's already there. It's primarily for their non-adult peers, but there they are. That goes through the interim regional funding formula that partners were most familiar with. And this past year, we introduced an adult program type formula that funds adults that are in adults-only spaces, realizing that those can be quite unique, and learners that are in adult basic education and literacy and basic skills programming. So really we fit in and around and through. This is a very imperfect graphic. We've got the ESE, the elementary and secondary education program, K-12. We've got PSE with all the PSE folks here today. And then we've got adult ed that was initially thought to sit kind of in between the two. It lets you get from one to the other, but it also acknowledges that there are goals outside of PSE. There are reasons that you might want to get your high school that have nothing to do with the decision that you've made yet. So I did think that since this was the crowd for it, we would talk a little bit about adult education versus the university and college entrance preparation program, because we do get a lot of questions about this. What about someone that looks like they could be funded under one or the other? How do we figure out where that learner should be supported? So the learner eligibility from the perspective of the adult education program is that you meet the age, 22 and above. If you're 21 and under, you're a regular ESE learner. You're funded under the ESE program, that you're ordinarily resident on reserve. Again, there's no restriction to what prior education you've done, completed or not. From the program consideration side, the outcome from our perspective is that you're getting something that pertains to high school. You're getting a new transcript because you've upgraded. You're getting a new diploma, or you're getting your first diploma because you're completing. Or if you've got an individual education plan or an individual learning plan, those are unique circumstances. We're not necessarily looking for a completion credential there, but that we're focusing more on the pre-PSE side. So the learning can take place at any school. It can take place at a secondary school. It can take place at a PSE. It can take place at an adult education facility. There's no restriction whether that's located on reserve or off. PSEs newly delivering adult education that are not currently in the education information system as delivering secondary, we can add to the system so that we can get the learners funded through that. So again, acknowledging that this is meant to be a first step toward First Nations visions of lifelong learning. This one is focusing very much on secondary and what it takes to get back into secondary if you've had a discontinuous journey. And we're not presupposing what lifelong learning might look like. I've taken some things out of the First Nations holistic lifelong learning model that came out of the research that was done in 2007, just to show that this really is a first step. We're seeing what can be done. So moving on to that new funding formula that was introduced last year. So we are currently in the 4th year of that initial 5-year duration. Adults reported on the nominal roll have been supported through the regional funding formula since 24-25. Last year, we introduced this new funding formula for the 2 program types that are very adult specific. So this is what we are currently covering under the new program formula. It looks very similar to the interim regional funding formula, but it tries to take a look at what is specific about adult learners. These amounts are drawn from information that we had on hand, particularly on hand from partners, but we drew a lot from provincial comparability in order to exceed it in the Ontario context. The Ontario comparability for adult learners is limited and structured in very specific ways that we're not doing a lot of work that needed to be done at the community level. So this slide is quite long and complicated, but we are providing the deck. What we want to do, given that this past year for us was quite an extraordinary year, we did not get to do the engagement that we wanted to do prior to introducing the new formula. We want and need to do that now. So we are looking to really understand what the needs are, what the challenges are, what success has been based on, so that we know how to do this right, how to fund this properly. So the broadest questions that we're asking are, what updates to the formula would best support adult learners in your community? Which elements of the formula are currently working? Which ones are not? And the bigger piece, how are adults unique in a way that we don't have components for? What recommendations can we make that are not reflected in the existing formula that was built for youth? So the engagement won't be touching on the Ontario interim regional funding formula. That will stay as it is, but we are speaking to those adult-specific formulas. We're setting up 3 ways to participate. We've got a survey. We've reached out to COO, we've reached out to the OTIFA Adult Ed Technical Table to get feedback on that survey, make sure that it looks like something that's going to be useful. It's very short. We know how many requests you get to participate, to give your feedback, to provide recommendations. We've got 11 questions. We've timed it at around 5 to 8 minutes. We have timed it with partners as well that were happy to give us that support. We've provided as many extra spaces that are optional for you to give input beyond the questions we asked to find the questions we didn't ask. It is not anonymous. However, we will not be using any identifiers in any data. Data will always be rolled up. And if you do want to participate in a completely anonymous way, we are providing email for that. You can use, provided of course you've got an anonymous email, a Gmail account or something that you can leverage for that. You can either write to us blank slate, anything's possible. We also have a list of guiding questions, or we can use the survey as a template. And finally, we are re-engaging with the OTIFA table. We are hoping to do that 2 to 3 times. That allows us to talk about the results as they come in, and also to talk about things that maybe don't happen best through an online environment like a survey or like an email. So we've got the direct input coming in from the survey, from the email, from the table. We're going to be doing the data analysis as we go, taking that back to the table, discussing those findings, adding to them, filling in the blanks, and then coming up with some results that we hope are useful for participants as well as for us. Anything that we receive by March 6th, we know that's coming up pretty fast, is going to be included in our internal review of the formula to look at changes that we can recommend for implementation in the 26-27 fiscal year. Feedback after that is still going to be looked at. It's not a hard stop. It's not a cutoff. We can keep the information coming. We can keep working on refining things. We are committed to giving a presentation back that's as long as it needs to be, that answers as many questions as come up, and that presents everything that we learned, both things that are directly relevant to the formula and things that aren't. The survey asks a lot of questions because we do want to know about components that we haven't thought of. It asks a lot of questions that are not component-like, that talk about the needs. And ideally, we look at needs that become potential components. So anything that you provide back through the survey, through the email, through feeding information into the table, all of those experiences, all of those suggestions not only go toward the formula, but they help us to craft a budget ask. When we seek renewal of the investment, this is the information that's going to drive it. Of course, we've got the nominal role. Of course, we've got FTEs and we've got enrollment numbers, but what we don't have is the discussion of what works, what could work if it was structured a little differently, and what's not working at all. So we get that through talking directly with you. So our timeline, we're already in February. We've already started data collection. The surveys are specific to each region. So the Ontario survey is ready to go. It's ready for you. Today was our aim. We are hoping to meet with the table again, to just keep the information going. What have we heard in email? What have we seen in the survey? What do we want to talk about that's not conducive to those 2 formats? February, March, we're still going to be doing the collection and analysis, having another table meeting. Then in March, we do that reporting. We talk about those results. We want to present back to partners. This is what we heard. Did we get it right? Where are things missing? So next steps are take the survey. We've got a link. I wish I'd thought to put a QR code in this. You'd think I would think. You did. Yes. Angel, you're the best. So we've got the survey live with all the feedback that we've gotten so far to fix it, to make it work for Ontario region. Send an email. I know that first email is all the keys on the keyboard. Use the second one, Sam Gray. I'm so happy to answer emails as they come in. You can always reach me, or use that email to reach out and say, hey, we want to actually talk. The folks I work with are fantastic. We are always happy to sit down. And that is it for the speed introduction to the adult education program. Again, with this incredible opportunity to talk to PSE folks for the first time. I mean, prior to joining ISK, I worked with the Indigenous Institutes Consortium and some of Ontario's Indigenous Institutes. I know that adult education is happening in those spaces. I know that the program development is happening there. I know that I know that they've got learners in those spaces that maybe aren't funded. And we know we've got things that we need to look at, ways in which adult education doesn't really gel with the ISK environment. So we know we've got things like many communities are unlikely to be able to put together a cohort of adult learners. And what does that mean for the program delivery? If you can't teach 12, 14, 15, 30 people at once, that's a whole different set of financial challenges. We know that adults need different wraparound supports, not identical to their non-adult peers. We want to talk about things like caregiver responsibilities. We don't know what we can, what will result in a component, but we know that we want to make a strong case for recommending what's needed. And I guess the last one that we are super aware of, or two, where's adult education happening? We know it's not always happening in the secondary school. We know the school doesn't have capacity necessarily to introduce an adult education program. And if those adults are appearing throughout the academic year, if they're not there when we actually do the count of learners, how are they getting funded? What if they start after September and they're gone before the next September? How do we find them? How do we figure out what they need to continue? All right.
I just want to add for everybody in the room. So the survey that Sam was talking about, so Ontario, ISK did work with Ontario Region through the Ontario Technical Table for the Interim Funding Approach to kind of tailor the survey to our needs and, you know, some of the concerns and issues that we have heard over, you know, the last few years of this program and this investment. And so we did work with Sam's team to tailor that survey, and it's finalized now. And so there is a QR code that's on kind of like that little ticker tape thing that goes in between, but we also will do a mass push out of the survey in the link to everybody across Ontario through our networks and all the participants here, so that it will be you know, out there, and you hopefully you'll be able to find it. And if you can't, get in touch with us and we can certainly make sure you get it. Thank you. I don't know if there's any questions for Sam on this.
It's also okay to think of a question later and email me.
Great.
All right.